Welcome everybody to the 2017-18 Action Research Extended Resource Presentation. This is Gail, and I'm here to walk you through how to complete Action Research, whether you're a Year 1 candidate or Year 2. If you're a Year 2, I just want to give you a slight heads up that there are some differences. So please note, it's not exactly like walking through our inquiry-focused question project that we did last year or the IIP Module C. We have made some changes based on our field research, based on the multi-tier system of support that is being brought to us by California Department of Education, and also by our new induction standards. So please pay close attention. You can fast forward once you've read this whole presentation or listened to it once, and go back and review anything at any point that you need for further clarification. Also, I strongly encourage anyone who has questions to contact either their mentor. It's nice if you're reviewing this presentation with your mentor side by side. Also, your liaisons are resources within your own district for more district level specific questions, such as how do I access these specific resources within my district context? And if your mentor is not able to assist you in the question that you have in particular, I am always here for you. So let's begin. If you're viewing this presentation in the sequence in which it was designed, you already know that your Action Research Project is a required component of your induction program. You'll be completing 2 over the 2-year course of the journey. It's not an option, it's required. It's a self-selected focus, and the reason that that's important is that's a hallmark of adult learning theory, is that we know that adults value choice, and when given an opportunity to make a selection that's applicable to their context for teaching and learning, the outcome is more significant, more impactful, and more likely to have a measurable outcome on student learning or teacher practice. And it should be related to the data that you've been collecting on yourself through the first portion of your ILP, which is your CSTP self-assessments through the continuum of teaching practice. That's why we talked about at program orientation, beginning to collect a statistically significant sampling of your own self-assessments so that you can begin to see where your areas of strength lie and where your needs are falling. It is listed as step 6 in the ILP, and on our website, if you pull down step 6, you'll see the extended resources posted there, and you'll also be able to append those resources once completed to step 6 on the ILP. It's the same general process for general ed and special education induction candidates. It's just that your focus areas will be slightly different because you're serving different populations of students, and your areas of concern, we assume, may be somewhat different in priority and in nature. And yes, this is an area where we strongly consider collaboration with your mentor to be highly valuable. We want you to be collaborative. The only part that the collaboration is inappropriate on is when you're actually doing your research. Your research is something that's independent, but how you apply your research and how you interpret the research is the application and the outcome of the research as you analyze student work. Once you've made changes to your instructional practice or your managerial techniques or how you're engaging students in classroom routines or in subject matter strategies, all of those things are completely applicable for not only mentor collaboration, but collaboration with peers if you have the opportunity to be working in a PLC, either one that's mentor-led or site-based. Ooh, that word form, it just makes some people cringe and other people get so excited. Whether you're a cringer or whether you're jumping around saying, yes, there's some structure here, doesn't matter to me at all. There's no right or wrong response. But there are some forms that are associated with action research. They come from our old system that was sponsored by the Commission on Teacher Credentialing, our FACT Formative Assessment for California Teachers system that we used for many, many years. In fact, all of the previous years that I was part of the BITSA induction program, we used FACT to guide our Plan, Teach, Reflect, and Apply formative assessment cycle. We are no longer bound by that. We're looking now more at the standards for the teaching profession as guiding our reflection and application. And so what I have done is taken what I feel are the best guiding forms that help bring a little bit of structure to this project, which again is an essential project. It's something that's done at the university level, and it's something that really helps us to refine our practice. And I've received input from our liaison team over several different edits over 2 years. And so this is, I wouldn't say it's a field test because last year was a field test, but this is our first functional working significant reduction of the number of forms, and I would say that over my course of involvement in induction, this would be my 17th year being involved. This is really the most radical cutback of documentation. I was going to say paper, but we're not using actual physical paper this time. And it's really just the bare essentials, a backbone, a skeleton onto which to fix our ideas and thinking. And to that end, I've actually plumped up some of the reflective questions to be more specific and prompt our candidates and mentors to make sure that we ask the guiding questions that really dig deeply into the higher order thinking that is corresponds to the higher order thinking that we want our students to be doing in the classroom related to the work that they are also doing alongside of, concurrent to what we're trying to teach them. That was poorly worded, I apologize. 2 questions that come up when we talk about forms. A, where do I literally get them? I mentioned that in the previous slide. You navigate to the induction website, which I believe all of you have bookmarked. You pull down under steps, step 6, and you will find the forms that are all linked together in one document, but there are actually sort of 3 distinct pieces of them. And in the coming slides, we're going to look at all of the components broken down, but they are one Google form so that it'll be easier for you to link it back to your ILP. Candidates, we want you to make a copy and rename it. But the renaming protocol for this one is not so significant because what you're going to do is you're going to paste it back in to your ILP once it's done, okay? If you have questions about that, you can talk to one of your mentors, your liaisons, or to me specifically. There are a couple of ways that you can do that. If you are tech savvy and you know how to make a link that will go in and that will open across platforms, go ahead and do that. If you want to literally paste it into your ILP, that's fine too. You do not have to be a Google genius in order to complete induction. If you need help from that, please start with your mentor first before asking us. And if your mentor is stuck, ask your liaison. If your liaison is stuck, then ask me. You might find your peers to be a good resource on this one. Remember, you need to make a copy of the document. I think I began by addressing the why, but I'll wrap up with that as well. The reason that we have the forms is that they help to guide the process and make sure that everyone has completed the same essential information and the same process. And we're going to break that down here in just a moment. So let's go ahead and take a look at what remains of 8 different form sets that we used to work with. And for those of you who haven't heard me tell this story, when I first started, I think it's been a long time ago, but I believe there were 18 sets of forms, and I'm not just talking about one-pagers. So this is quite a radical departure from what it used to be, and I think that you will, or at least I hope that you'll find that these are very meaningful questions and meaningful data collections embedded in these forms. I included this slide just for those of you who are less familiar with action research, maybe didn't have exposure to it in your university program, or haven't, some of you have already started or maybe even completed a secondary postgraduate program. But action research is a hallmark of graduate programs, and it is something that's universal. It crosses over nursing, medical programs, statistical analysis, engineering. But I think that the most important component can be summed into this little quote about why it's valuable. Because as adults, we don't really care as much the older we get about learning unless it impacts what we're doing in the field. So once we're employed and we're out of that educational setting, we really want to see what difference is it going to make in our practice. And so I leave you with this little passage, which actually comes from a non-educational source. It comes from their department in Nebraska of Health and Human Services, and I think that that's significant because it speaks then to that crossover. But take a moment to just ponder that one. And this is the why. And it's always important before we jump into the what are we supposed to do, to just make sure that we're grounded in the why. I would never ask you to do something unless I really thought that there was a significant reason. So keep that in mind. We're trying to simplify the how, and there's a really sound reason for the why. Here we are again, one more time. We talked about this at the beginning when we were discussing how to work with our ILP. And this graphic I love. I don't know if any of you remember it, but it was up on our second workshop that we discussed the beginning work with our ILP, why we're doing what we're doing here in induction. But we're talking about best practices in education. And this just is something that tickles my fancy, that there are a few components of the beginning bits of documentation that endure, and one of them is this plan, teach, reflect, and apply cycle, the Petra cycle, which continues to be a hallmark, a shining star of our program design back from the old days when we drowned everyone in paper. It's that mentoring part, the mentoring component of helping our candidates, back then our PTs, our participating teachers, go through this process, because this is actually a mental process just as much as it is a formal process of questioning and recording ideas. This is what good teachers do. We talked about this back in the beginning, but it bears repeating as we get prepared to do something that's a little bit more elaborate than what we started out by doing, which is just self-assessing. But we're constantly, as practitioners, in our minds, even if we're not always writing this down and recording it in formal fashion, planning, teaching, and assessing, and that assessment part just sort of got formally written in a little bit after, because we realized that teaching and assessing they're just inextricable. And then a sound teacher never is satisfied without reflecting on how things went with a lesson, and applying the takeaways. Are students benefiting from what we're doing? Is it comfortable for us as instructors? What do we need to do to continue with the positive and remove the elements that are not productive? Because if we rest on our laurels and continue with practices that are less than productive for students or uncomfortable for us, we risk burnout as professionals, and we threaten the success of students. Okay, now here we go. This is the how. How do we work with these documents? So this is a little snippet of the first part of the first document on your action research plan, which comes almost directly from what we worked on together in our recent workshops, which was the action focused question approval workshops, where we work together to look at samples and figure out how this whole thing gets started. And this is basically almost a copy over of that approval form, which you either completed electronically or on paper. you use data in cell 1, and when we talk about a cell, we are referring to a box. I don't know why we call this a cell, but that's what we do. We talk about these as cells. It's just always time in memoriam in cells. So based on the data collected, and that's your own data. This is your self-assessments. These are the observations from your mentor. These are samples of student work that you have been discussing with your mentor. Then you need to think about what the focus of your research should be, and we did that together collaboratively. When we move over to cell 2, you already did this together in the workshop, so you are going to type in your answers here. And this, I'll just take a moment to say, this must be typed. We cannot read everyone's handwriting. It's just too exhausting, and as this is a Google Doc, it's inappropriate to handwrite something and then scan it in as a Google Doc. And then this is something that occasionally people don't quite read. You need to make sure that you note your current placement on the CSTP, and this is to be done at the beginning of the action research, and then again at the end of the action research. So it's very nice if you just make a little bit of a distinction. You can even just say beginning and end, and sometimes you'll see growth in your self-assessment. That's what we're hoping for. But if you don't, it doesn't mean that you failed this project. We're just looking to see where you self-assessed. So that could be emerging, exploring, integrating practice, and you just mark that in. So if you're working on standard 2.3, for example, it would be 2.3, the date, and the level of your practice. And then please also record that on your ILP. And then at the end of your inquiry, what changes would you expect to see in student achievement or teacher practice as a result of your action research? And that's what's your goal? That's another way of just saying, what is your goal? Simply stated. So there you go. And again, all of this should probably be pretty much done for you by the time you've completed the workshop that we spent together. Moving down the page, the next 4 cells are the actual action plan heart, and they talk about the next part of we're actually getting to the heart of the planning and teaching cycle. So plan, teach, reflect, and apply. So we did a little initial planning by figuring out where we needed to start, and now we're going to get into the teaching and assessing portion of our project. And there are some things that need to take place in order for us to follow the sequence of what you did and for you to be able to record it in a logical way so that it's communicated out in a record. And that record is important because as an institution that recommends you for a credential, we need to be able to say that you are pursuing best practices, that you are making connections to the standards for the teaching profession, and that you are reflecting on your own growth, and that you are making progress in the teaching in the CSTP. So this is part of that documentation. So if you're wondering, like, why do I have to do this? Well, this is an essential component of what the state of California wants you to do. And so that's a big part of the reason why. It also helps you to grow and reflect and become a better teacher. I've added some bullets in cell 6 where we've asked you to really describe or name. I think name is a better word, to tell the truth. That's a better verb. Each of the resources explored and the action that, the connection that you had. And then if you'll notice on the 4th bullet down, your research should reflect about a minimum of 15, oops, sorry, I wrote over that, not very good at the pen, 15 hours of work. I have no future as a sportscaster. 15 hours of research. but we don't micromanage you on that. We do have a good sense of what you list and about how long those activities should take, but I don't need you to tell me how long each thing took. We trust your professional judgment here. And at the end of this document, you'll see a list of ideas and also a suggestion that if you have something that is in question, of who to contact in order to see if that's something that's appropriate. Moving over to cell 7, application. Think about that word, application. Cell 7, or column 7, does not ask you to rehash a description of what the research was. It asks you, what did you do once you researched something? What did you do in your classroom as a change? So for example, if I attended a workshop that was sponsored by my district on PBIS because I'm investigating different ways of changing the classroom climate and seeing what impact that has on student learning, then I want to know, the liaison team would want to know what you, the candidate, did as a result of that workshop, okay? It's not enough just to hear that you attended the workshop. We want to know, what did you change? You attended the workshop, you came back, and what did you do differently as a result of attending that workshop? That's what column 7 is about. So sometimes people write in column 7 in the future tense, but the future tense is inappropriate in this case because that tells us that you haven't actually implemented an idea yet from your research. So we don't want to hear something from the future that you would like to do. We want to see that you have actually tried something out. And then moving across to column 8, the measurable results and impact that were either on student achievement or teacher practice. Did this new idea, strategy, concept, grouping idea, you name it, whatever it was that you tried, did it actually work? That's what we'd like to know. And there are many different ways of describing it. It can be described in a narrative way. It can also be described numerically. We'll be going over some examples of that, or we did go over examples of that rather, in our workshop time. And then there is a compendium of postings that demonstrate different ways that candidates in the past have represented impact. And you have to find the one that fits best for you, but we're looking for a specific connection to evidence. So what actually changed as a result of something that you did? So again, it's a causal statement. I did this, and then as a result, something else happened. So at the risk of sounding silly again, I'll tell you that the word because is a really easy one. It's not very specific or sophisticated, but it's an easy way of expressing relationship. You can also say, when I did this, X happened. Now that I'm implementing Y, Z is taking place. Or 40% of students responded in this way when I did blank. These are all just vague suggestions, but I think it'd be very helpful for you to read those suggestions that were voluntarily donated by past candidates to give an idea if this is something that you're struggling with. And I'll tell you that the more specific that you can be, the more numeric or the more descriptive, the easier it is for the liaison reviewer to understand that you understand the measurable impact. So measurement doesn't always have to be numeric. Sometimes it can be narrative in nature, but it needs to express a causal relationship. Something that does not work for column 8 would be, my mentor told me that this was not working. That doesn't tell me that you understand the reason that something is happening. I don't want to know what your mentor told you. I want to know what you think and why. During this process, and actually right at the beginning, to tell the truth, but this is the order that the forms appear in, so don't always be fooled. Sometimes the first thing you do isn't necessarily the first thing that appears on a form, but early on you're going to be considering 3 students that are really seriously on your mind for differentiation, because across the state of California, as I mentioned earlier, in order to be providing equitable outcomes for students, we need to be thinking about not just teaching in a whole class manner. We need to be differentiating our presentation to students in order to provide universal access and a multi-tiered system of support that's both focused on students' academic and behavioral needs for differentiation in a classroom in all lessons at all times. And this specifically is significant for students who are learning English and students who have special needs. Now, for those of you who are in the Education Specialist program, you already have a classroom full of students with identified special needs. And so what I want you to think about is some of your students have very complex IEPs compared to others or relative to other students in your classroom. So when you think about your students who have your focus students, in this case it would be focus student number 2. For general ed, it's special populations. For you, it's going to be the student who has your most complex IEP, the one that's the most difficult for you to implement fully. In California, we have such a significant population of English learners. If you find that in your classroom that you've selected that you do not have an English learner, I'd like you to contact me directly, because we're going to talk about reclassified students, and we're going to talk about students who are growing up in a non-standard English environment, and that's something that I'd like to discuss with you directly. So please contact me via email if you do not have a student that has CELT scores right now, and we're still using CELT because starting very soon we're going to be rolling into the LPAC, but none of you have LPAC scores yet. And then Focus Student 3 is Teacher's Choice, and what I always tell candidates about this is the child that you just can't stop worrying about. And there are a variety of suggestions if you scroll down this page when you open up the whole file. This could be a child who is going through a difficult home situation, a child with an unidentified learning challenge that you have not yet figured out or identified. Sorry, that is also redundant. Someone who is behaviorally challenged, someone who is just had an interrupted education. An additional person who fits either category 1 or 2. It could also be someone who's an advanced learner who is flying through the curriculum and that you are concerned that they might be under-challenged in your classroom and you're not sure how to serve them. That's a special population as well. And then it's a really good idea, as much as possible, to find an alternative for each of these categories, because one of the things that we know is oftentimes our most vulnerable students, the ones that we're most concerned about, are also our most transient populations. So you might choose these 3 children at the beginning of the lesson series, and the chance that they could possibly be moved out of your focus period or moved to another classroom or move schools is more likely in some ways than a child who is in a more stable situation. So please make every attempt to choose 3 additional focus alternatives who will be there on the day that your mentor comes to do the observation. A really important part of your action research is your mentor is going to come and observe an entire lesson. So this is more of a formal observation than the first time that they came if you were a year 1 student, or year 1 candidate rather, excuse me. And they are going to actually take more formal notes. They may use a variety of strategies to do so. but they're going to stay for the entire period, and you're going to share with them a lesson plan. Now, your lesson plan, I will provide 2 different templates for you to use. They'll both be Common Core style templates. And the purpose of you writing out a lesson plan is for them to be able to follow along. It's not to critique your lesson design, but it's for them to be able to perhaps give you a little bit of coaching if you need some assistance in that area. So don't stress out too much about this. This doesn't get turned in for review to your principal or anything like that. There's no failing in this situation. And in fact, it doesn't even really get appended. This is between you and your mentor. So this is just a coaching opportunity, but it's also for your mentor, mostly for your mentor to be able to follow along during your observation, a tool. So think about it that way, please, candidates, and don't get too upset. It's the only time during the program that we ask for a formal lesson plan. And again, it's not about criticizing, it's about making sure that you have all the elements of instruction properly aligned and placed. And if there's an area of need, your mentor will address that with you. But it's really not about form, because as we all know, there's no one right way of writing a lesson plan. We need you to please also provide a seating chart if that's not something that you regularly do for your mentor, so that they are able to most impactfully interact with your class as they record notes using a variety of strategies that have been presented during our mentor trainings. You will also schedule a pre and post conference session before this even takes place. And this lesson observation should take place ideally sometime in the in the middle of your lesson series that you're teaching while you are trying out new strategies. So a lesson series varies wildly depending on the age of the students that you teach, your subject matter, and yeah, those 2 factors mostly. So I can't tell you how long your lesson series should be. If you tend to teach very short lesson series, then maybe you might want to think about it more as like a unit of study that you want to be conducting over time, so that you can see some impact of several strategy changes as you're trying to make some adjustments to your practice. That's something you want to work out with your mentor. So if you teach, if you consider a lesson series to be maybe like 4 days long, then you're going to need to link a couple of lesson series together into a unit or a group of similar lessons. There's no right or wrong way to do that. It's just whatever makes common sense to you. And as far as the duration of the observation, again, it's whatever is developmentally and subject matter wise appropriate for your students. So if you're teaching kindergarten, the lesson is going to be much shorter than a high school period, and that's fine, because that's what's appropriate for your students' learning. The thing I can't emphasize enough is that when you design the lesson that your mentor is going to observe, please make sure that there is a product that the students actually come up with, even if it's not a finished product, that there's some work that you and your mentor can collect and analyze, because analyzing student work with a collaborative focus is just an incredibly valuable opportunity. And you're going to, as it shows in number 4 here on this screenshot, you're going to attach copies of those focused students, and you're going to be scoring them in some manner. Now, some schools are very traditional and use grades, rubrics, scores. Others are more holistic and do peer feedback kind of a thing. However it works in your situation, that's fine. But we want to see the work, and we want to see the feedback that came from that lesson. So you need to build that in to your lesson. So you need to backward think that through. If you don't have the student samples, then we can't continue with this part of the lesson. You would need to reteach something, and that's going to set you back quite a ways. So please avoid that pitfall and make sure that you send it in. We have accepted in the past digital submissions of work, You need to check with your district's technology and video recording policies, make sure that you stay in compliance with those. And if it's something that's still in progress and you want to take a snapshot of it, go ahead and do that. Just remember too that there cannot be any last names on work submissions. That's as per confidentiality, as was discussed at the beginning of the program year. So this is a copy of the 3 reflective and application questions that are back on the first page, the head page of your action research set of documents. And basically that's your guiding page. It's kind of like a little bit like the index or the title page of a book. It's a poor analogy, but it's the closest thing I can think of. And so that's where you first list the focus of your action research, and then in the center of those 2 pages, and they can expand out so they can actually end up being more than 2 pages, but in the center of that section is where you record what you did and the impact. And then once you've taught your lesson, you've analyzed work with your mentor, you've had some good dialogue and discussion about what happened during your lesson, your mentor has shown you some data and you've reflected on that data, then you go back to questions 9A, 9B, and 10. And this is where you plug in some of that data from what's happened after you've had your observation and after the lesson series has come to a conclusion. So maybe you've made some modifications based on the data that your mentor shared with you, some things that you weren't able to see until they came in and asked you some probing questions, analyzed work together with you, showed you some things that were you can't see everything. Nobody has eyes in the back of their head. So when data is presented to you in a new way, hopefully it causes you to reflect and maybe make a few more adjustments. And so what we want to see is your closure and how you're going to make some final changes to your practice. And this is sort of the last part of the action research section that is completed. And it wraps everything up, and it should be rich and descriptive. Highly encourage you to use statistical counting and numerical representations that were shared with you during your observation and during your own observations of your students as you continue to work with them during this whole period of inquiry and action research. And hopefully the exemplars will be helpful to you. I will tell you that this is probably one of the key areas that the liaisons look for to see if the action research has made an impact on your teaching, and if you're able to express that to us in a way that is based on the facts that you saw in your classroom and the data that you collaborated on with your mentor or your peers, and that you can translate that into student outcomes and how you might make adjustments to hopefully try to improve student outcomes or your own practice, which would hence lead to better student outcomes in the future. This is a video that I found. It's not based on California induction, but I think this is an excellent model of a mentor guiding a candidate through using facts in a pre-observation and post-observation conference. I strongly recommend that you look at this video together with your mentor. I just included a hyperlink on the bottom to a resource that I've used in designing and continuing to use action research in our new version of induction. It used to just kind of come along with the program, and we called it Inquiry into Teaching and Learning, but it really is actually action research. And so I wanted to make sure that you understand. I know we discussed it at the beginning of the presentation, but if you're curious about why, this is a book that I recommend. It's published by ASCD, and I've seen over the years a lot of people that were resistant to this project because they felt like it was just one more thing to do, but those who put into it and get a lot out of it. So I'll just leave it at that. I know that you have a lot to do because I have a lot to do. But if you're interested in improving your student results, then you need to find out what you can do to improve your own teaching practice. And this is one of the best ways that you can do that. So I leave you at that, and I leave you with a few research-based practices on why. And wrapping up, this was a little bit confusing, and we changed the name of it. Last year we called it a portfolio party. I don't want anyone to be confused. This year we changed the name to an, oh gosh, it's not an ILP. Yeah, it is actually an ILP party. Sorry, even I'm confused a little bit. It's so many changes. I really appreciate everyone for hanging in. In the ILP party, we will be looking quite a bit at your action research. And the liaison team will be giving you your final formative feedback. We call it scoring, but it's the score value is just a numeric representation of your growth in the CSTP, and it's formative feedback to you as well through those in-text citations. In order to prepare for that, we wanted you to have an opportunity to have a little bit of fun and celebrate. So the liaisons come together and they put on a little themed party for you. It's one of their ways of thanking the mentors in their district and thanking you, the candidates, for all your hard work. And you will have 3 opportunities to sign up. You register, and you're going to be working in peer groups this year because of numbers will be organized slightly differently than we did last year. And you're going to be opening up your peers ILP, and you're going to be giving them some feedback on a checklist about what they've got. If they've got everything that needed to be done in the action research section complete, especially because we don't want anything missing. And this is the last chance to check and make sure that everything is complete. Now, some people took this really seriously last year, and some people just kind of gave their friends a bye. So let me just say, if you give your friends a pass and say, oh yeah, sure, you did it all, and the liaison team finds later that things are missing, then you haven't really helped your peer out. So I would say think about it from that perspective. Would you like someone to really help you by helping you, or help you by just getting on to the good food? So the good food will be there, but it's a little confusing when we say that the team scoring and the due date is the 18th, and the most important thing to remember is that your work needs to be done in advance of the date that you registered so that your mentor can be your first proofreader. So if you sign up on April 15th, then you and your mentor need to work out when your action research and the rest of the components that are due at the end of the year, that their steps need to be completed. The action research is far and away the biggest thing, but when else? When between you and your mentor does your mentor need to have everything written out so that that person can give you feedback first? And then plan that out so that by the time you get there on the 15th, that peer who happens to be matched up with you isn't the first person who's read your completed work. So that's your obligation. It's a fun, festive time, but it's also a serious time because we want you to have an opportunity to get another person's perspective before the seasoned teachers give you their feedback. And that's important because what we're trying to do is foster a peer community of collaboration, because that's who we want to be working with in the future, is a collaborative group of teacher professionals who really care about their work and care about guiding others into this career for the enrichment of the students that we serve. So thank you all, and you have plenty of time to work on this. and many resources to support you. And don't hesitate to ask. Thanks a bunch.